Welcome back to This is Baseball. I am Brandon Johnson. Today is Tuesday. Yes, this is our very first Tuesday episode of This is Baseball. If you missed last week's episode, we are doing a little shakeup of the schedule. So for the first 2 years of This is Baseball's existence, we were releasing episodes once a week on Wednesdays. And just based off of some life stuff, I'm able to open up my schedule a little bit and am going to be doing 2 episodes a week every Tuesday and every Thursday for the foreseeable future. There will be new episodes of This is Baseball. I'm excited to get that schedule going starting today and look for those episodes all season long. So if you've been with the show, if you've listened to the show for a long time, at the beginning of each season, I like to do my predictions and projections. And I'm excited because this time I'm going to break it down into 2 episodes, today's episode, and then Thursday on the actual opening day, I will do an episode as well. So I'm going to be focused on the American League today and those 15 teams, and I'm just going to give you little tidbits of info about each team, kind of where I think they will be this season, what acquisitions or subtractions were made that are going to impact them either positively or negatively. And then on Thursday's show, I will do the National League the same. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive in to the show. I've got 15 teams to go over in the American League today, and I want to start with the Kansas City Royals. If you are new here, I am from Kansas City and am a very big Royals fan. So you're going to hear a lot of Royals talk. I like to kind of talk about a little bit of everything, but you're going to hear Royals talk a lot of the time. So that's just a little bit about me. So let's dive into the Kansas City Royals a little bit. So let's just kind of take a look at what happened last year. So we got into 2024 and we felt really optimistic. The Royals had one of their better off seasons that they've had in a very long time. They managed to sign who I think is the 3rd best player in all of Major League Baseball, and Bobby Witt Jr., to a long-term contract. They brought in Seth Lugo, they brought in Michael Wacha, and a few other players to help make this Royals team a potential playoff team. If you go back to 2023, you know that the Royals lost 106 games, and it was just an absolutely miserable season. But 2024, there were only, I believe, 7 returning players on the 2024 roster that were on the 2023 team. So it felt like the Royals had a pretty good opportunity to at least be competitive just based off of what their roster consisted of. Now, last year the Royals got a wild card berth and won a playoff series. They swept Baltimore in 2 games on the road, then they lost to the Yankees in the American League Division Series. Last season, though, you had Bobby Witt Jr., Vinny Pasquantino, Salvador Perez. All 3 were highly productive on offense. Bobby Witt Jr. was an MVP finalist. He took 2nd in those votes. But the pitching rotation was largely the reason that the Royals were so successful. It was like really nothing went wrong with the Royals rotation. You had Seth Lugo come out and be great. Cole Reagans lived up to what he thought we could be. Michael Wacha was amazing. Brady Singer, who is no longer with the team, he got traded to the Reds for Jonathan India. Like just 4 serviceable consistently reliable starters, and that is, again, much of the reason that the Royals made the playoffs. And I think a lot of people look at this team this year and go, they kind of think that same thing. And they're like, well, the pitching was pretty much like perfect and everything kind of fell into place. And I don't see that happening again this year. And honestly, that's probably true. Do we think that Seth Lugo is going to be a Cy Young candidate type of pitcher again? Maybe not. But I think he's going to just fall off a cliff? Absolutely not. I think Michael Wacha is going to continue to just be a quality start machine. And I think Cole Reagans in year 3 is going to just continue to be great. There's nothing I've seen in Cole Reagans' game that makes me think that he's going to have some regression or decline in his season. So I like that in the Royals, that I feel like they have 3 starters that are going to be serviceable. Then they brought back Michael Lorenzen on a 1-year deal to come in and be good. And then they have options at the 5th starter role. So the difference, though, in this Royals team and last year's Royals team is I think that this current bullpen is significantly better than last season's bullpen. Last season was just kind of a disaster, and who's going to come out and screw it up this time? And I think, just looking at some of the moves that were made last season, bringing in Hunter Harvey, who we didn't get to see much of, but bringing in Lucas Erceg and being able to be a high volume or a high leverage spot there. But they brought in Carlos Estevez, who is going to help solidify some of that bullpen and just make you feel a little bit better when the starters hand the ball to the bullpen in the back half of the game. I already said earlier, they brought in Jonathan India, who's just going to be a solid bat for a Royals lineup that, had a lot to be desired in 2024. You could count on, obviously, Bobby Witt Jr., Salvador Perez, and Vinny Pasquantino, like I mentioned before, but you had a bunch of other players that were kind of hit or miss. You had MJ Melendez, who is kind of in that same realm of, his timeline is the same as Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny Pasquantino, and unfortunately, MJ Melendez hasn't really got to where I thought he could be as a player. But I look at MJ Melendez and I'm kind of like, man, you have all the potential in the world and I want you to succeed, but it's kind of a make or break season for him. And just really the Royals outfield as a whole is a little bit questionable. I think Kyle Isbell is a fantastic defender, but you're not really too excited about what he brings to the plate. And then Hunter Renfroe in right field, hope he has a nice season as well. But I'm going to tell you this, and I've seen a lot of projections and looked at a lot of different stuff to kind of prepare for this episode, and I see a lot of places. I see like Baseball Prospectus, ESPN, they all kind of have the Royals sitting at about 500. I actually think they're going to be better than that. I tend to believe that those projections, like I've mentioned previously, are due to them thinking that maybe the starting pitching isn't going to quite perform the same way in 2025 as it did in 2024. But I think that you have at least 3 solid pitchers in your rotation. I know it would be nice to have Brady Singer here still, but you have to, if you want to get something of value, you have to give something of value, and Brady Singer ended up being that guy, which I kind of talked about last season. I thought Brady Singer would end up getting traded at some point. I thought it might have been at the deadline, but obviously the Royals were buyers at the deadline, so they weren't really moving anybody that had a significant impact on their major league roster at that point. But I think the pitching rotation is gonna be fine. I think the lineup is better, and the bullpen is better. And I think the bullpen being better is going to contribute to the success. If these starting pitchers maybe aren't quite on the caliber they were last year, I think it'll help. So I have the Royals over 82 wins. I have them more at the 88 or 89 wins this year. I do think that the AL Central, weirdly, for the longest time, I feel like it's been one of the weaker divisions. Last year, it was the strongest in the American League. I think that's going to continue this year. And I think that the Royals can and will compete to win that division. I'm just going to say it. I believe the Royals can win the American League Central, just based off of everything that I've said and based off of some of the things that I am going to say about the rest of the AL Central here in a few minutes. But I like the Royals. I like last year and them kind of overachieving and surprising everybody and just having an overall great year. I think that they're going to build off of that, and I think that they have a great roster, a great culture, great manager, and a front office that is baseball first and is doing everything that they can to create sustainable success. And that is something that I think is desperately needed in Kansas City, because they have not really, obviously they won in 2014 and 2015. They won a World Series in 15, but that was it. There wasn't any sustainability. It was, they got to the top of the mountain and then had a couple of mediocre seasons and then went to the basement for, 6-7 years. And now they're back at the top, or back into relevance at least. And I think that's going to be their goal, is to kind of do what the Guardians are doing and the Brewers are doing. And maybe they're not going to be the top spenders in free agency in the offseason, but they're going to spend money wisely, and they're going to make trades, and they're going to hit on draft picks, and they're just going to continue to have this factory of success that they've built over there. Now, it's a little long-winded about the Royals. Like I said, that's my home team, but I have 14 other teams that I would like to get to. So that is what I'm going to do now, and I'm just going to stay inside the AL Central and kind of move down the line. Then we'll just kind of go through each division and kind of give some tidbits of information there. Let's hop over to the Cleveland Guardians. The Guardians won the American League Central last year and went to the American League Championship Series. They lost to the Yankees in that one. I actually thought that the Guardians last year overachieved. I was a little unsure about them. Just had a lot of young talent and a rookie manager coming in. I thought they were going to be okay. I didn't expect them to have the season that they had. I think anybody in Cleveland is happy with the results of the 2024 season for them. They had a completely lights out bullpen. They had Emmanuel Clase on the back end. And there was really, honestly, only one point in September where Cleveland wasn't really in front in the American League Central. And I like Cleveland. I think much of their success was due to their bullpen. And, being from Kansas City, I've seen a team that heavily relies on their bullpen to get them to where they're trying to go. So if you believe that the Guardians' bullpen is going to be as lights out and as dominant in 2025 as it was in 2024, then you're probably feeling pretty good about Cleveland. And I like to think that the bullpen's going to be very good again this year. I do expect some regression, but I think their lineup is going to be solid. Steven Kwan, Jose Ramirez, they brought back Carlos Santana. I think their pitching rotation is probably, in my opinion, the weakest part of their game. I do know that they are expected to get Shane Bieber back at some point this season. Nobody really knows when, but the Guardians are going to be interesting. I think they're going to be good, but I don't know if they're going to have the dominance that they had in 2024. Moving on to the Detroit Tigers. I've always kind of looked at the Royals and the Tigers as two teams that are kind of on the same path as far as getting to where they want to go. And both teams finally, in 2024, took that step forward. They both went to the postseason. They both won a postseason series and both lost in the division series. Detroit's story was kind of cool because they were kind of down and out of it in the late season, and then they did the classic baseball thing and got to September and got hot and got in front of the Twins and ended up getting that final wild card spot. So they're a team that has expectations now of being in the postseason. That is both good and bad because it's now added pressure. But they made a few additions this offseason that I really like. They brought back Jack Flaherty, who, if you know, he was actually with the team last year, got traded to the Dodgers, and then decided to come back to Detroit in the offseason. He signed a 2-year deal with them, and they also signed Gleyber Torres, who came over from the Yankees. But I think the biggest question with the Tigers is Javier Baez. Can Javier Baez be good again? Like, that's the big question for me. They tried to get Alex Bregman this season and they lost out on him. But if you look at Detroit's rotation, it's very, very solid. Obviously, Cy Young Award winner Tarik Skubal is at the top. I just mentioned Jack Flaherty. They'll have Alex Cobb at some point. He's dealing with a little bit of an injury, but he will be in there at some point. But once again, I like Detroit, and I think they're going to be in the mix as well. It's weird talking about the AL Central as a powerhouse in the American League, but I think that we're finally there. Let's talk Twins for a little bit here. I have seen a lot of projections for the Twins that have them winning the American League Central, and honestly, I'm personally just not buying it. I thought that last year the Twins had a good opportunity to win, and they were just not good in a lot of spots. I think you're going to need Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton to be very healthy, and you're going to have to rely on Pablo Lopez and the rest of the rotation. And again, just in a kind of stacked AL Central, I think, they're going to once again be kind of the odd man out should three of the Central's teams make the postseason again. But recent history would tell you that the Twins are going to have a good year because really over the last 10 years or so, they've been good one year, then bad the next, then good, then bad. So this is, on the calendar for the Twins. It's their year to be good again. And maybe that's what the projections think. Now let's look at the final team in the American League Central. It is the Chicago White Sox, the dumpster fire of the league. Had the worst season record-wise in the history of the game last year. They lost 121 games and were just absolutely miserable to follow. Every team that they ran into beat up on them. A lot of people are making an argument that the AL Central was so strong because they got to play the White Sox so many times, and maybe not. But honestly, the White Sox, I'm looking at their projected lineup and their rotation, And I know you guys already know this, but 2025 is going to be a long season as well. And honestly, I don't really see any light at the end of the tunnel, which is unfortunate because I so badly want the White Sox to be good. There's something in my brain that tells me the Royals and the White Sox should have this huge rivalry, but they've not really been good at the same time. I don't know what that is, but anyway, I'm looking at the White Sox lineup, and Andrew Benintendi's hurt. He fractured his hand, but I see Luis Robert Jr. and you got Michael A. Taylor out in I couldn't even tell you who half of these guys are, and that stinks. I know there's a lot going on with the White Sox off the field of trying to find a new ballpark or trying to build a new ballpark and ownership potentially selling. I honestly think that might be kind of the best thing for the White Sox, is just to get new ownership and just kind of start over and go a different direction. But yeah, I hate to say it, but gonna be a long year in the south side of Chicago. Let's jump into the American League West. So I'll start with the Astros, because the Astros have ran that division. They've ran the American League for really the last 6 or 7 years. And last year was the first year in 6 years that they didn't at least go to an American League championship. But let's look at the Astros. They are projected, from the PECOTA odds, have them at 87 wins, 88 wins, behind the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers are at the top of a lot of people's projections in the West. But I'm looking at the lineup for the Astros. You have Jose Altuve, Isaac Paredes, Jordan Alvarez, Christian Walker. I think just those four alone, plus a few other names in that lineup, I think their lineup's still going to be very solid, and they're going to be competitive in the American League. I think something that's going to be interesting for everybody is the fact that Jose Altuve is likely going to be a left fielder. We've seen him play as a second baseman his entire career. But I think the rotation is going to be interesting. You have Valdez and Hunter Brown at the top. They're both very, very good. And then you have Ronel Blanco. And then the 4 and 5 spot, it's a little bit interesting. I worry that this rotation for Houston can hold up through the duration of a season. But I like Houston. I think they're going to be competitive as well. Let's talk about those Texas Rangers. They won the World Series in 2023. They missed the playoffs in 2024. Had a lot of injuries stack up. But I actually like the Rangers too this year. I think Marcus Semien and Corey Seager obviously at the top of that lineup. Two solid players that are obviously going to be there for a long time. Adolis Garcia, Jonah Heim. And then in addition, they got Jock Peterson in their lineup. He's somebody that's going to provide some pop in that lineup. But something that I think I'm most excited about is the rotation in Texas. You're getting hopefully a healthy Jacob deGrom. They brought back Nathan Eovaldi. And just due to a couple injuries, you're likely going to see Jack Leiter, who's a standout prospect, and Kumar Rocker up as well. So, whether they're up here all season or they're up for a little bit, the rotation is going to be really fun to watch. Obviously, contingent on health. I hope deGrom is healthy because he's absolutely electric when he is. But Jack Leiter and Kumar Rocker are going to be very, very fun to watch. And I think the rotation plus just a solid lineup and health will be, will give the Texas Rangers a chance to be competitive and potentially win the West. Let's talk Seattle Mariners. Most projections I've seen between Baseball Prospectus and MLB.com have the Mariners in third place in the AL West, which is probably accurate. I am just personally, I'm not buying into the Seattle Mariners this year. I feel like the past 4 seasons have just been, will they finally break through or won't they? They made the playoffs a couple of years ago and lost in the first round. I just think there's too many other good teams in the American League for Seattle to be, an 84-win team and sneak into the postseason. Obviously, I think Texas and Houston are better. Seattle just can't seem to get over the hump. They stick around for a little bit, and basically every season for the last 3 years, there's been a portion where you're like, oh, Seattle's coming for the West, or they're coming for a playoff spot, and they just ultimately fall short. And I don't think they're going to be a team that is in the mix for a playoff spot either. I also don't really think that they made enough or really made any notable acquisitions in the offseason. So I'm just not high on the Mariners. I know it's probably not what a lot of people want to hear. I do love Julio Rodriguez. I think Randy Arozarena getting traded over there last season does help, obviously. But again, there's just too many good teams for the Mariners to have a seat at the table for me. Let's go Angels. The Angels actually had a pretty busy offseason via trade and free agency. I think that, they are going to do what they always do, and they're going to float around and be competitive for a little bit, but they're ultimately going to be a team that loses 90 games. I've talked about it a lot, and it stinks for Mike Trout, because Mike Trout, obviously one of the best players of his generation, but just has never, I can't even say he's never had a team around him, because there have been multiple opportunities where you look at the Angels on paper and you're like, this is a World Series contending roster, and Mike Trout's only been to the playoffs once. He's never won a playoff game. And he's kind of in he's not getting any younger. He's moving to right field this year, and clock's kind of ticking on the Angels, and it stinks, because you're going to, unless Mike Trout gets the guts to ask for a trade, we're going to remember Mike Trout as one of the greatest players to never have any sort of postseason success. And that stinks. But yeah, the Angels, just to me, like I said, they made a lot of moves in the offseason, but it just doesn't feel like they have any real direction. And our final team in the American League West, it is the Athletics, that are no longer in Oakland. They are temporarily in Sacramento. I don't think they want to be known as the Sacramento A's, so they're just the Athletics. And they are projected to be at the bottom of the West, to lose 90 or 91 games. And that checks out for me. Looking at them, they are they're going to be just okay. They're probably going to do about what they did last year. But they're going to be playing in a minor league ballpark in Sacramento. And I think the big story with the A's is just going to be more off the field type of stuff as far as their stadium is concerned. Are they going to break ground in Las Vegas? Is Las Vegas going to get done? Are they going to end up somewhere else? There's a lot of just unknowns surrounding the A's and the future of kind of their ballpark and where they're going to play. I think they'll obviously get the Las Vegas stuff done, but until then, I don't personally see the A's really trying to make a splash or even care to be good until they get to Las Vegas, until they have a permanent home. So, until then, unless they just kind of do classic A's thing and go on a run on a budget, like, I don't think they're going to be good anytime soon. Definitely not going to be good this year. Now let's move on to the American League East, because the American League East has kind of been that powerhouse that we've talked about, and I still think that they have a lot of good teams. Let's start with the Blue Jays. I know, random team to start on, but let's start with the Blue Jays. They are intriguing this year. They've kind of been in this window over the last 5 years of, similarly to the Mariners, where you're like, they're just right there, but they just can't get it. I think the Blue Jays are better than the Mariners, but I'm looking at their lineup, and I'm intrigued by this lineup. I'm just looking at 1 through 5. So you got Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who's probably going to sign a crazy contract after the season. They brought in Anthony Santander from Baltimore. They signed him in free agency. George Springer and Dalton Varsho. Like, those names alone, like, I'm very interested in Toronto. I think they're going to be a very fun team to watch. The addition of Anthony Santander is huge for them. It's going to provide pop right in the meat of the order, and maybe he's kind of the piece that they've been missing, and this Toronto team can get over the hump and get up there with the Yankees and the Orioles and be a postseason contender for real. A lot of projections have Toronto in second place behind Baltimore. They have them over the Yankees, and that is possible. We'll get to the Yankees here in a second, but I want to stick with the Blue Jays for just a minute. You look at their pitching rotation, and it is very veteran heavy. A lot of old guys, but a lot of reliable guys. They brought in Max Scherzer, who is on, he's in his 40s. He's coming off of an injury, so we know that Max Scherzer is a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's had a great career. He's been just completely dominant, won multiple Cy Youngs, won a World Series championship. I think just his presence alone in that clubhouse, plus see what he's got left in the tank, is going to be a good jolt for the Blue Jays. And yeah, I'm buying into the Blue Jays. I was heading into this episode, and even kind of when I was going to start talking about it, I was kind of on the fence on which way I was going to go and just kind of see where I naturally went. And I'm looking at the Blue Jays, and I'm kind of excited about them. Now, let's move on to the Yankees, because I briefly mentioned them in the Blue Jays talk. Obviously, the Yankees went to their first World Series since 2009, and they ran into a Dodgers team that we'll talk about in the next episode that made quick work of them. The Yankees lost to the Dodgers in the World Series in 5 games, and just, it hasn't been great for the Yankees over the past few months. I kind of talked about it in the previous episode, but got Giancarlo Stanton, who's going to be out for a little bit, and they lost Juan Soto to free agency. Juan Soto was a huge piece of the Yankees' success in 2024, and Garrett Cole went down with Tommy John. Garrett Cole, obviously fantastic pitcher, and was going to be a huge piece of this team. But you look at the lineup for the Yankees, and there's some new names in there. Cody Bellinger, who they got in a trade for from the Cubs. Paul Goldschmidt, who they signed in free agency, is going to take the place of Anthony Rizzo. But Jazz Chisholm will be back as well. Austin Wells, and then Aaron Judge still in that 2 spot. That's going to obviously be an MVP contender. But looking at the rotation without Garrett Cole in it, I still like the rotation. Carlos Rodon is going to be the opening day starter. They brought in Max Fried in free agency from the Atlanta Braves. They signed him to an 8-year deal. So he's going to be a key piece to this rotation, especially with the absence of Garrett Cole. Marcus Stroman will be back as well. But I don't necessarily think that the Yankees are going to be as dominant this year as they were in 2025, and I think that is largely just due to the injuries and the absence of Juan Soto. I think we're going to find out really quick that, Juan Soto is kind of the key to success with a lot of teams. But yeah, let's move on to the Baltimore Orioles. Baltimore, who is kind of right in the middle of their window. They won the East a couple of years ago. Ended up as a wild card team last year. They, I think, are still going to be very good. Again, a lot of people have them as favorites in the East. I like them coming out of the East. They did lose a few players. They lost Corbin Burns to the Diamondbacks. Corbin Burns, who they acquired in a trade last season with the Brewers. Already mentioned Anthony Santander, left in free agency. They lost Eloy Jimenez, John Means. But they brought in Tyler O'Neill to play in the outfield, who I think can be a good piece in that ballpark. Brought in Gary Sanchez for some depth, Charlie Morton for some veteran leadership as well. And just they have a nice lineup. Gunnar Henderson, who's one of the best players in the league. Adley Rutschman, same story. Their rotation is a little bit interesting to me. Zach Eflin at the top, Charlie Morton second. It'll be interesting with the pitching in Baltimore. But again, I like them to be at the top of the East. The only real question is Gunnar Henderson. He's dealing with a little bit of an injury, so will he be in the opening day lineup or not? But we've got 2 more teams in the American League East to go over. We have the Rays and the Red Sox. Let's talk Red Sox real quick because they had a really nice offseason. They brought in Garrett Crochet with a trade from the White Sox. They got Alex Bregman. They brought in Walker Buehler on a 1-year deal. Aroldis Chapman to come in. They did lose Tyler O'Neill, Kenley Jansen, Danny Jansen. I like the Red Sox. I think they're going to be pretty fun this year. You have Jared Duran, Rafael Devers, Alex Bregman, hopefully a healthy Trevor Story. I think Garrett Crochet, Walker Buehler are going to be great for this lineup or for this rotation. But I don't think the Red Sox are going to be in the postseason. I think they're going to hover around 500. I think this is a year for the Red Sox to kind of take a step forward and get back to their winning ways. And then maybe in 2026, they are competing for the AL East. So let's go to the Rays, who are in an interesting spot as a franchise for a few different reasons. I spoke on it last week a little bit, but there's some drama kind of going around with ownership there, and the league is kind of pressuring Stu Sternberg to sell the team if they can't get a deal done as far as the stadium goes. Well, after my episode dropped last week, the Rays announced that they were not going to move forward with a new stadium deal, and they were going to focus on fixing Tropicana to get it ready for the 2026 season, and a lot of people are not happy about that. I think the best thing for the Rays is to get a new stadium done. I don't think it makes a ton of sense to spend a bunch of money on a ballpark that is widely agreed upon as the worst ballpark in the league. So I think the Rays will be something that we need to pay attention to as far as stadiums and potential ownership changes over the next year or so. But let's talk on the field. The Rays have been a team that have been just perennial playoff contenders. They've had, a down year though, last year and the year before, and a lot of that is just some other teams in the division and the league have stepped up, and the Rays have kind of had to take a back seat. And I kind of see that happening again. I am not really all that excited with the Rays. I think they're a team that is going to be at the bottom of the AL East, and I think they're going to win 75, 76 games, and they're going to need to just figure out how to rebuild their team and kind of get back to winning the way that the Rays do, and that's just building strong pitching and a serviceable lineup. But that is my take on the American League. I think there's a lot of interesting teams in this. I think there's really only 2 or 3 teams that we kind of already know, like, okay, you're going to be great or you're going to be really bad. But there's a lot of teams that, are wild cards, right? And I think this is going to be a fun year. So that, again, is all I have for this Tuesday episode of This Is Baseball. Thank you guys so much for listening to the show. I will catch you on Thursday to do the National League side of things. See you then.